A motorcyclist kicks a blind, elderly woman's guide dog without realizing it was a K9. A story that will leave you stunned. What happens halfway through completely changes the ending. We'd love to know which city you're watching this video from. Let us know in the comments. While you're at it, subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on all our content. Sunset Grove Park was alive with the sound of life. Children's laughter rang out near the playground, while joggers pounded along the paved trails. Elderly couples strolled hand in hand, and the scent of roasted nuts from a food cart wafted through the crisp morning air. In the midst of the lively scene, Teresa Mitchell walked steadily along the central path, her hand resting lightly on the harness of her guide dog, Thor. Thor, a sturdy German shepherd with a calm but alert demeanor, led Teresa with practiced precision. His movements were smooth, his gaze constantly scanning for obstacles. To Teresa, Thor wasn't just her guide. He was her lifeline, her companion, and her link to a world she could no longer see. Teresa's blindness had come later in life, a result of a degenerative condition that robbed her of her sight, but not her determination. Refusing to let her condition confine her, she ventured out daily with Thor by her side, savoring the sounds, smells, and sensations of the world. "I think we'll take the long path today, Thor," Teresa said softly, her voice warm with affection. Thor responded with a slight tug on his harness, steering her toward the shaded trail beneath a canopy of oak trees. The serenity of the park was abruptly shattered by the roar of an engine. Heads turned as a glossy black motorcycle sped onto the pedestrian path, its rider weaving recklessly between startled walkers. "Hey, this is a no-vehicle zone," someone shouted. But the rider ignored the protests, his helmet glinting in the sunlight as he revved the engine. Thor's ears perked up, his body tensing as the motorcycle drew closer. Teresa, sensing his change in posture, paused mid-step. "What is it, boy?" she asked, her grip tightening on the harness. The rider, a young man in a leather jacket, seemed unfazed by the chaos he was causing. His impatience was evident as he shouted, "Move it!" Thor reacted instantly. With a sharp bark, he stepped in front of Teresa, planting himself firmly between her and the oncoming threat. The motorcycle skidded to a halt just feet away, the screech of its brakes slicing through the air. "Are you kidding me?" the rider yelled, yanking off his helmet to reveal a scowling face. He strode toward Teresa and Thor, his body language radiating frustration. "What's your problem, lady? You and your mutt almost got yourselves run over." Teresa's head tilted slightly, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, her hand moving to stroke Thor's head as if to calm him. The young man's irritation boiled over. "Your stupid dog's in the way," he snapped, and before anyone could stop him, he raised his boot and delivered a swift kick to Thor's side. The blow sent Thor staggering, a pained yelp escaping his throat. Gasps rippled through the park as onlookers froze in shock. Teresa's hand flew to her chest, her voice trembling. "Thor? Thor, are you okay?" Thor recovered quickly, his loyal instincts overriding his pain. He returned to Teresa's side, standing protectively as his eyes locked onto the rider. His growl was low but unmistakable, a warning that demanded respect. "What the hell is wrong with you?" a woman's voice rang out. A tall, sharp-eyed woman in a red coat stepped forward, her finger pointed accusingly at the motorcyclist. "He's a guide dog. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "It's just a dog," the rider retorted, shrugging dismissively. Another voice chimed in, this time from a man holding up his phone, already recording the scene. "Not just any dog. That's Thor, the retired K9 everyone's been talking about. He's a hero." The crowd buzzed with recognition. Thor's reputation as a former police dog had been featured in local news stories months ago, highlighting his career of service and bravery. The rider's bravado faltered as murmurs of disapproval spread. Someone shouted, "You're going to regret that," while another yelled, "Call the cops." Minutes later, the wail of a siren cut through the commotion. A police cruiser pulled up near the edge of the park, and two officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached the scene. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, addressing the crowd. Multiple voices answered at once, recounting the events. The rider shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance giving way to nervousness as the officers turned their attention to him. He kicked a service dog. The woman in the red coat stated firmly. The officer's eyes narrowed. A service dog? Is that true? The rider stammered. I didn't. Look, it wasn't a big deal. The dog was in my way. The officer crouched down to check on Thor, who remained alert but calm. You okay, boy? He murmured, earning a wag of Thor's tail despite the lingering tension. Turning back to the rider, the officer's tone hardened. You assaulted a guide dog. That's a serious offense. Let's see some ID. As the officers escorted the rider away, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to express their admiration for Thor. Some snapped photos and videos, which quickly made their way onto social media. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForThor and #K9Hero were trending, bringing national attention to the incident. Teresa, unaware of the growing buzz, knelt beside Thor, running her hands gently over his fur. You're so brave, Thor, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. Thor leaned into her touch, his loyalty unwavering despite the pain he'd endured. For Teresa, he was more than a guide. He was her protector, her hero, and her unwavering companion in a world she could no longer see. But neither Teresa nor Thor could have predicted how this moment would change their lives forever. The video of Thor's confrontation with the motorcyclist spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForThor and #ServiceDogsMatter. News outlets picked up the story, painting Thor as a heroic figure whose loyalty and bravery had been shamefully disregarded. Teresa, however, remained oblivious to the growing attention, her focus solely on Thor's well-being. That evening, as Teresa sat in her modest apartment stroking Thor's fur, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting visitors, and Thor, though still sore, sprang to alertness. A friendly voice called from the hallway. Ms. Mitchell? My name is Ellie Carter. I'm a reporter for Channel 8 News. May I have a moment of your time? Thor's growl softened at Ellie's calm demeanor, and Teresa hesitated before opening the door. Ellie, a petite woman with a kind smile, explained her purpose. The story of what happened in the park has touched thousands of people. I wanted to hear your side of it. Teresa, reluctant but polite, allowed Ellie in. Over tea, she shared her story. How Thor came into her life after her blindness, their daily routines, and the bond that gave her a sense of independence. Ellie listened intently, jotting down notes and asking gentle questions. By the end of the interview, Ellie was visibly moved. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Your story, and Thor's, needs to be told. The next day, the news segment aired, showcasing Thor's bravery and Teresa's resilience. The broadcast resonated deeply with viewers, sparking an outpouring of support. Donations poured in from across the country, along with offers to assist Teresa and ensure Thor received the best care possible. But amidst the flood of positivity, a shadow lingered. Among the messages was an anonymous note, chilling in its simplicity. Thor doesn't belong to you. He was stolen, and I'll prove it. The note arrived in Teresa's mailbox without a return address. The paper was thin, the handwriting bold and deliberate. Thor doesn't belong to you. He was stolen, and I'll prove it. Teresa frowned as her fingers traced the raised ink. Sitting at her kitchen table, she held the note up to Thor, who sat patiently at her side, his head tilted as if sensing her unease. Well, Thor, she said softly, seems like someone out there has too much time on their hands. What nonsense, huh? Thor didn't respond, of course, but he nuzzled her hand, his warmth reassuring her. She tossed the note into the trash and tried to forget about it. After all, Thor had been adopted through proper channels from the K9 retirement program. She had all the paperwork neatly filed away in her drawer. There was no reason to doubt his rightful place in her life. Yet, as she went about her day, the words lingered like an unwelcome guest. Meanwhile, in a bustling office in Chicago, Caleb Danner sat frozen at his desk, his eyes glued to the screen of his laptop. The news segment was playing for the third time, and his hands trembled as he hit pause. There, on the screen, was a German shepherd walking beside a blind woman. His body was bulkier now, his fur streaked with age, but Caleb would have recognized those sharp, intelligent eyes anywhere. "Rex," Caleb murmured, his voice thick with disbelief. He pushed his chair back abruptly, earning a curious glance from his coworker across the room. Caleb ignored it, pacing the length of the office. Rex had been his partner during his years in a classified K-9 unit. They had faced danger together, and Rex's sharp instincts had saved Caleb's life more than once. But after a raid gone wrong 2 years ago, Rex had disappeared, stolen during the chaos. "How the hell did you end up with her?" Caleb muttered, glancing back at the screen. His mind raced as memories of that night resurfaced. The firefight, the confusion, the desperate search afterward. No trace of Rex had ever been found, and Caleb had been forced to accept that he was gone. But now Rex was alive, and with someone else. Determined to uncover the truth, Caleb grabbed his phone and searched for the reporter behind the piece. Within minutes, he found Ellie Carter's contact information. He dialed her number, his voice calm but firm as he introduced himself. "Miss Carter, I saw your story about Thor, the guide dog, and I believe I have information that might interest you. Would you be open to meeting in person?" Ellie, always on the hunt for a lead, agreed to meet him the next morning at a coffee shop near her station. The next day, Ellie arrived at the cafe early, sipping her latte as she waited for her mystery source. Caleb walked in moments later, his tall frame and purposeful stride giving him the air of someone used to taking control. He spotted Ellie, extended a hand, and introduced himself. "I appreciate you meeting me," Caleb said, sitting across from her. He hesitated for a moment before opening his worn leather satchel and pulling out a file. "I believe your story about Thor is missing a crucial detail. That dog? He's not Thor. His name is Rex, and he was my partner." Ellie raised an eyebrow, her journalist instincts kicking in. "That's a serious claim, Mr. Danner. What makes you so sure?" Caleb slid a photograph across the table. It showed a younger version of himself, dressed in tactical gear, kneeling beside a German shepherd. Ellie leaned in to examine it, noting the unmistakable similarity to Thor. "This was taken 4 years ago," Caleb explained. "Rex and I worked in a classified K-9 unit. He wasn't just any police dog, he was trained for high-risk operations. 2 years ago, during a raid, Rex disappeared. I reported him missing, but we never found any leads. And now, here he is." Ellie studied Caleb's face. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with conviction. Still, she remained cautious. "Do you have any other proof? Adoption records, maybe?" Caleb nodded. "I've got his microchip ID, his medical history, and a log of his training. Everything matches. If you check Thor's records, you'll see inconsistencies." "I guarantee it." Ellie frowned, unsure of how to proceed. "Let's say, for argument's sake, you're right. What do you plan to do about it?" "I want him back," Caleb said simply. "He's not just a dog. He's family." Ellie leaned back, considering the ramifications. "You realize this isn't just about paperwork. Thor, Rex, has bonded with his current owner, a blind woman who relies on him for her independence. If what you're saying is true, this could devastate her." Caleb sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know it's complicated, but Rex didn't end up with her legally. That matters." Ellie tapped her pen against her notebook, torn between skepticism and intrigue. If Caleb's story checked out, it would change everything, not just for him, but for Teresa and Thor. "I'll investigate," she said finally. "But until I have proof, I'm not making any promises. If you're wrong, you could cause a lot of harm." Caleb met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "I'm not wrong. You'll see." That night, Ellie began digging into Thor's adoption records. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Mismatched dates, missing signatures, and a troubling lack of transparency. Something about Thor's past didn't add up. And for the first time, Ellie realized Caleb might be telling the truth. Ellie Carter sat hunched over her laptop in her dimly lit apartment, a steaming cup of coffee growing cold on the table beside her. The deeper she dug into Thor's adoption records, the more questions surfaced. The documentation seemed official at first glance, but as Ellie cross-referenced dates and signatures, inconsistencies became glaringly obvious. For one, the agency that had facilitated Thor's adoption, Paws of Valor, had closed its doors shortly after placing him with Teresa. Attempts to contact anyone associated with the organization led to dead ends. The phone numbers were disconnected, and the website had been taken down. Ellie's journalistic instincts buzzed with suspicion. "How does an entire agency just vanish?" she muttered, scrolling through archived news articles about the organization. One small article caught her attention. K9 Adoption Group faces allegations of fraud. Her heart skipped. She clicked the link, her eyes scanning the screen. The article detailed accusations against Paws of Valor for illegally acquiring retired police dogs and reselling them at a profit. While the agency had denied wrongdoing, the sudden closure aligned eerily with the timeline of Thor's adoption. Ellie leaned back, her mind spinning. If the agency had trafficked K9S, Thor's true identity and ownership might very well align with Caleb's story. The next day, Ellie called Caleb, arranging another meeting. They sat in the same coffee shop, though the air between them was heavier with tension. "You were right," Ellie began, sliding a printed copy of the article across the table. "The adoption agency that placed Thor with Teresa? They've been accused of fraud. It looks like they were involved in some shady dealings with retired K9S. Caleb's face darkened. "I knew it. They must have taken Rex during that raid and passed him off as a retiree. Damn it." Ellie nodded. "It gets worse. I found gaps in Thor's adoption paperwork. Some of the forms don't have official signatures. Others were filed months after the fact. It's like they were trying to cover their tracks." Caleb clenched his fists, frustration evident. "So, they took him, erased his identity, and sold him off like he was a commodity." He shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "He wasn't just my partner. He saved lives, mine included. And now he's with Teresa." Ellie finished for him. "You said it yourself, Caleb. He's not just a dog. He's family." "That's true for her, too." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I'm not trying to hurt her, Ellie. I can't let him go without a fight." Ellie studied him for a moment. His sincerity was undeniable, but the situation was more tangled than ever. "If you're going to pursue this, you'll need undeniable proof. Something that links Thor directly to Rex." Caleb nodded, determination hardening his expression. "I have that proof. Rex has a microchip with a unique ID. If we scan Thor for that chip, it'll settle this once and for all." Ellie hesitated. "That might not be easy. Teresa's protective of Thor, and for good reason. This will blindside her." Caleb's gaze softened slightly. "I'm not trying to take anything away from her, Ellie. But Rex, he's all I have left from that part of my life. I need to know the truth." Later that evening, Ellie drove to Teresa's apartment. She had debated how to approach the subject for hours, rehearsing her words in the car. When Teresa opened the door, Thor greeted Ellie with a gentle wag of his tail, his intelligent eyes scanning her curiously. "Ellie," Teresa said, smiling warmly, "come in. Thor's been talking about you all day." She chuckled at her own joke, patting the dog's head. Ellie stepped inside, her stomach churning. "Thank you, Teresa. I need to talk to you about something complicated." Teresa tilted her head, sensing Ellie's unease. "Go on, dear. What's on your mind?" Ellie took a deep breath. "It's about Thor. There's a man named Caleb Danner who's come forward claiming that Thor isn't just a retired K9. He believes Thor is his former partner, Rex, who went missing 2 years ago." Teresa's smile faded. "What are you saying, Ellie? That Thor doesn't belong to me?" "No," Ellie said quickly, her tone gentle. "I'm saying that there's a possibility his past isn't what we thought. Caleb has photos, documents, and he mentioned a microchip that could identify Thor as Rex. I wanted to come to you first, before this goes any further." Teresa's hand tightened on Thor's harness. "Thor has been with me for over a year, Ellie. He's my guide, my protector, my friend. I don't care who this man is. Thor belongs with me." "I understand how you feel," Ellie said softly. "But if Caleb's claims are true, this could get complicated. The law might not be on your side." Teresa's voice trembled with a mix of anger and fear. "What am I supposed to do? Hand him over?" Thor is my eyes. Without him, I'm nothing. Thor, sensing Teresa's distress, pressed his head against her leg. She sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. You're not taking him from me, she whispered fiercely. Ellie crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. No one's taking him right now, Teresa. I just need your permission to scan Thor's microchip. It might clear everything up. Teresa hesitated, her fingers gripping Thor's fur. Finally, she nodded, though her expression remained defiant. Fine, scan it. But I'm not letting him go without a fight. Ellie nodded solemnly. I promise you, Teresa, no one's rushing into anything. Let's just find out the truth. As Ellie left the apartment, she couldn't shake the weight of Teresa's words, or the look in Caleb's eyes when he talked about Rex. The truth was coming, but she feared the cost would be higher than any of them could bear. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of the veterinary clinic where Ellie had arranged for Thor's microchip to be scanned. Teresa sat in the waiting room, her hands tightly clasped around Thor's harness. Her knuckles were white, her lips pressed into a firm line of resolve. Beside her, Thor lay calmly, his head resting on his paws as if unaware of the tension thickening the air. Ellie stood nearby, her phone in hand, texting Caleb to let him know the scan was happening. She felt like a mediator in a conflict far larger than herself, and the weight of the situation gnawed at her. Caleb had wanted to be there, but agreed to stay away for Teresa's sake. His absence, however, didn't make the situation any easier. A veterinary technician appeared in the doorway, a scanner in hand. Her cheerful demeanor faltered slightly at the sight of Teresa's stern expression and Ellie's uneasy posture. Ready to proceed? The technician asked, addressing Teresa. Teresa nodded curtly. Let's get this over with. In the exam room, Thor sat obediently on the table as the technician approached with the handheld scanner. She murmured soothing words to Thor, who remained still, his sharp eyes following her every move. The scanner beeped softly as it passed over his shoulder blade, and the technician glanced at the screen. Well, we've got a number, she said, jotting it down. I'll check it against the database. She stepped out of the room, leaving a heavy silence behind. Teresa broke the stillness first. Ellie, I want you to understand something. Her voice trembled but remained firm. Thor isn't just a dog to me. He's my partner, my freedom. If this man, Caleb, thinks he can just take him away, he's wrong. I won't let it happen. Ellie nodded, her heart heavy. I understand, Teresa, but if the records show that Thor is Rex, Caleb has a legal claim. That doesn't mean this ends here. You have a bond with Thor that no one can deny. Teresa exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Bonds don't matter in court. They'll see the paperwork, see me as just an old, blind woman, and take him away. Ellie crouched beside Teresa, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. I promise, I'll do everything I can to make sure your voice is heard. But we have to deal with the facts first. Minutes felt like hours before the technician returned, her expression conflicted. She held a piece of paper in her hand, the printed details of Thor's microchip. Well, the technician began cautiously. The ID matches records from a police K9 database. The chip was registered to a dog named Rex, previously assigned to Officer Caleb Danner. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Teresa's lips parted slightly, as if to argue, but no words came. Thor shifted on the table, his ears flicking at the sudden tension. Ellie broke the silence. Thank you, she said to the technician, who nodded sympathetically and left the room. Teresa's hands gripped Thor's harness like a lifeline. So, it's true, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He's Rex. Ellie swallowed hard. It seems that way, Teresa. But this doesn't mean Caleb can just walk in and take him. You've had Thor, Rex, for over a year. That counts for something. Teresa's face hardened as she stood, her hands steadying herself on the table. It has to count for everything. He's mine. Later that evening, Ellie met Caleb at the coffee shop, where he waited anxiously. As she approached the table, he stood, his posture rigid with anticipation. Well? He asked, his voice tight with barely contained hope. Ellie slid the printout of the microchip details across the table. It's him, Caleb. Thor is Rex. Caleb let out a shaky breath, sinking back into his chair. His hand hovered over the paper, as if touching it would solidify the truth. I knew it, he whispered. I knew he was alive. Ellie took a seat across from him. This isn't just about the records, Caleb. Thor, Rex, has been with Teresa for over a year. She relies on him completely. This isn't a simple case of returning property. It's his life and hers. Caleb frowned, his brow furrowing. I'm not trying to hurt her, Ellie, but Rex isn't just some guide dog. He's a highly trained canine, and he's my partner. We have a bond too. Then what's your plan? Ellie asked pointedly. Drag this through the courts? Take him away from a blind woman who sees him as her lifeline? Public opinion will be against you, Caleb, no matter what the law says. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know yet, but I can't just let this go. I need to see him, Ellie. I need to know if he remembers me. Ellie hesitated, but eventually nodded. I'll arrange it, but I need you to understand, this won't be easy for anyone. Be prepared for that. That night, Ellie sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared out into the dark. The facts were clear, but the emotions were anything but. She couldn't shake the image of Teresa clutching Thor's harness or the way Caleb's voice broke when he said, I knew he was alive. Two people, each with an unshakable claim on the same dog. And at the center of it all, Thor, Rex, silent but loyal, torn between two worlds. The courtroom was hushed, the only sound the shuffle of papers and the occasional murmur from the gallery. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows over the polished wooden benches. At the center of the room stood Teresa, frail but resolute, her hand gripping Thor's harness as if it were a lifeline. On the opposite side, Caleb sat stiffly in his chair, his expression a mixture of determination and regret. The case had drawn significant media attention, with reporters crammed at the back of the courtroom and cameras flashing outside. The battle over Thor, whether he was Teresa's trusted guide dog or Caleb's long-lost canine partner, had become a national spectacle, igniting debates about legal ownership, emotional bonds, and the rights of service animals. The judge, a gray-haired man with a stern but patient demeanor, cleared his throat. This case concerns the legal ownership of a German Shepherd known as both Thor and Rex. The court will hear arguments from both parties. Let's proceed. Caleb's lawyer, a sharp-suited woman named Margaret Finn, rose first. Your Honor, my client, Officer Caleb Danner, served alongside Rex in a classified K-9 unit. This dog is not just a companion, but a highly trained asset. He was stolen during a raid and sold illegally. We have the microchip records, training logs, and veterinary documents proving that Rex belongs to Officer Danner. She gestured toward Caleb, who nodded solemnly. This is not simply about possession, Your Honor. It's about restoring a partnership forged in life-and-death situations. Teresa's lawyer, a soft-spoken but fiery advocate named David Morales, stood next. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the microchip evidence, we argue that Thor has been with Ms. Mitchell for over a year. He has become her guide, her protector, and her source of independence. Removing him would not only disrupt her life, but cause irreparable harm. Thor is no longer a police dog. He is a service animal, and his bond with Ms. Mitchell must be considered. Caleb was the first to testify. Taking the stand, he spoke of his years with Rex. His voice cracked as he recounted their missions together, from detecting explosives to tracking fugitives. Rex saved my life more times than I can count, Caleb said, gripping the edge of the stand. He's not just a dog. He's my partner, my family. When he went missing, I searched everywhere. I never gave up hope. David Morales stood to cross-examine him. Officer Danner, no one doubts your bond with Rex. But do you believe that uprooting him from Ms. Mitchell, a blind woman who relies on him daily, is the right thing to do? Caleb hesitated, his gaze dropping. I don't want to hurt her, he admitted. But Rex, he's a part of me. I can't just let him go. When it was Teresa's turn to testify, she approached the stand with Thor at her side. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied herself, speaking directly to the judge. I don't see the world the way most people do, Your Honor, she began. But Thor, he's my eyes, my safety, my friend. I can't imagine life without him. Tears glistened in her eyes as she added, I understand what Officer Danner feels, but Thor has a new purpose now. He's not just my guide. He's my heart. Margaret Finn cross-examined her, her tone measured but firm. Ms. Mitchell, do you acknowledge that Thor's microchip confirms he was originally Officer Danner's partner? Teresa nodded reluctantly. I can't argue with the facts, but that doesn't change the bond we've built. The court allowed a unique demonstration during the proceedings. Caleb requested to give Thor commands in the language they had used during their K-9 training. The judge approved, though Teresa's lawyer voiced concerns about confusing Thor. In the courtroom, Caleb stood a few feet from Thor and issued a command in German. Platz. Thor hesitated for a moment, his ears twitching, before lying down obediently. Caleb's voice softened as he continued, Bleib. Thor stayed perfectly still. Teresa's grip on the harness tightened. When Caleb's demonstration ended, she leaned down, whispering softly to Thor. He turned his head toward her, his tail wagging slightly as if to reassure her. The judge watched this interaction closely, his expression unreadable. In her final statement, Margaret Finn argued, Your Honor, this is a matter of rightful ownership. Rex was taken from Officer Danner under illegal circumstances. His place is with the person who trained him, served with him, and lost him unfairly. David Morales countered, Your Honor, the law may recognize Officer Danner's claim, but the court must also consider Thor's current role. He has adapted to a new life with Ms. Mitchell, providing her with independence and companionship. To take him away now would not only harm her but disrupt Thor's own sense of purpose. The judge called for a recess, retreating to his chambers to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Teresa sat silently, her hand stroking Thor's fur, while Caleb stared at the table in front of him, his jaw clenched. Ellie, seated in the gallery, watched the two of them. She felt the weight of the story she had uncovered. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about two lives forever changed by him. When the judge returned, his expression was grave. I have reviewed the evidence and considered the arguments presented. This is not a decision I take lightly. Both parties have compelling claims, and this case transcends simple ownership. He paused, glancing at Caleb, then at Teresa. I will issue my ruling tomorrow morning. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as everyone filed out, the uncertainty hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Caleb and Teresa avoided looking at each other, their shared pain evident. That evening, Teresa sat with Thor in her apartment, her hands trembling as she held him close. No matter what happens, she whispered, you'll always be mine, Thor. Across town, Caleb sat in his car outside his apartment, staring at the photograph of himself and Rex. I never stopped looking for you, he said softly. I just hope you still remember me. The night stretched long and heavy, with both sides bracing for the judge's decision, a verdict that would change all their lives forever. The courtroom was packed once more, every seat filled with reporters, supporters of both sides, and curious onlookers. The tension was palpable as the judge entered, his robes swishing softly. Everyone rose, then sat in unison, the silence broken only by the faint rustle of papers. The judge's expression was grim, the weight of his decision etched into his face. He began to speak, his voice steady but solemn. This case has brought to light complex issues regarding legal ownership, emotional bonds, and the evolving roles of service and police animals. The evidence presented has made it clear that the dog known as Thor is indeed the same animal registered as Rex, previously assigned to Officer Caleb Danner. Teresa inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around Thor's harness. Caleb's jaw tensed, his gaze fixed on the judge. However, the judge continued, this court must also consider the substantial relationship between Thor and Ms. Mitchell, as well as the critical role he now plays in her life as a guide dog. Before the judge could continue, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A man in his late 40s, wearing a dark suit, strode forward. He held up a folder, his face a mix of urgency and determination. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information that may change the course of this case. The judge raised an eyebrow, his tone sharp. Identify yourself and explain this disruption. My name is Daniel Mercer, the man said, his voice calm but firm. I'm a former member of the FBI and was involved in the raid where Rex went missing. The information I have pertains directly to the events surrounding this dog's disappearance. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The judge glanced at both attorneys, who appeared equally stunned, before nodding. Approach the bench, Mr. Mercer. The unveiling of a dark conspiracy. Mercer handed the folder to the judge, who read its contents with growing concern. As he finished, he looked up, his expression grave. Mr. Mercer, please explain your findings to the court, the judge said, gesturing for the man to address the room. Mercer turned, his voice resonating through the courtroom. 2 years ago, during the raid in question, Rex disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Our initial investigation suggested he was stolen by a criminal network involved in trafficking high-value animals, including K9 units. What we didn't realize at the time was that Rex had been implanted with a special microchip containing encrypted data related to the case we were pursuing. Caleb's eyes widened in shock. What? He had data on him? Mercer nodded. Yes. The microchip was meant to be a backup, a way to secure critical information in case other methods were compromised. But the criminals got to him before we could extract it. Rex became a target not just because of his value as a trained K9, but because of the secrets he unknowingly carried. Ellie, seated in the gallery, whispered to herself, "No wonder the adoption records were so messy." Mercer continued, "The criminals erased Rex's identity and sold him through fraudulent channels to cover their tracks. I've recently come across evidence linking Paws of Valor, the agency that facilitated Thor's adoption, to this criminal network. They knew exactly what they were doing." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Teresa sat frozen, her hand still resting on Thor's head. Caleb stared at Mercer, his mind racing with the implications. The judge raised his gavel. "Order in the court. This new information significantly complicates the case." Mercer nodded. "Your Honor, I must also warn you. With this information coming to light, those involved in the network may see Rex, or Thor, as a liability. His safety is now in immediate danger." Teresa's heart sank as she instinctively pulled Thor closer. Caleb clenched his fists, his protective instincts kicking in. "What are you saying?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "That they'll come after him?" "Precisely," Mercer said. "This isn't just about who owns Rex. This is about ensuring his safety, and the safety of those around him." The judge leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Given the gravity of this new information, I am placing Thor under temporary protective custody. Until further notice, he will remain with an independent handler while the authorities investigate these claims." "No," Teresa exclaimed, rising to her feet. "You can't take him from me. He's my guide, my life." Caleb stood as well, his voice calm but resolute. "Your Honor, I'll protect him. He's my partner. I won't let anyone hurt him again." The judge raised a hand to silence them. "This is not a matter for debate. The safety of all parties, including the animal in question, is paramount. The handler will be a neutral party trained to care for both service and police dogs." After the session adjourned, Teresa sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, her hands trembling as Thor rested his head in her lap. Tears streamed down her face. Ellie approached cautiously, kneeling beside her. "Teresa, I'm so sorry. This isn't the end. I promise we'll figure this out." Teresa shook her head, her voice breaking. "They're taking him from me, Ellie. He's all I have." Caleb stood nearby, his own emotions conflicted. He wanted to comfort Teresa but knew anything he said might only make things worse. Instead, he approached the bench where Thor sat and knelt beside him. "I'll protect you," he whispered to the dog. "No matter what." Thor's ears perked up at Caleb's voice, and for a brief moment, the connection between them was undeniable. That night, Ellie sat at her desk, piecing together the puzzle. Mercer's revelation had thrown everything into chaos. Now, it wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight to keep Thor safe from a shadowy network willing to do anything to silence the truth. "This isn't over," Ellie muttered, her eyes narrowing as she typed. Not by a long shot. Thor's safety became paramount as threats emerged. Caleb, Teresa, and Ellie formed an unlikely alliance to protect him. The group unraveled the conspiracy, exposing the criminals and clearing Thor's past. With the criminals brought to justice, the court ruled in favor of Teresa, recognizing her bond with Thor as irreplaceable. Caleb, though heartbroken, respected the decision and found closure knowing Rex was in good hands. Thor became a symbol of resilience and courage, his story inspiring millions. Teresa and Caleb remained friends, united by their love for the remarkable dog who had changed their lives.